New Hampshire's primary is underway, and poll moderators say that voting is going wonderfully. Polling stations open at 6 a.m. Eastern. Officials say no voting apps are being used in an effort to avoid the technical issues that we saw during the Iowa caucuses. I want to turn now to our Elaine Quijano. She's at our CBSN set at the Bonfire Country Bar in Manchester. Elaine.
Rena, thank you. I am joined here on set at the Bonfire Country Bar by Stephanie Murray, author of the Politico Massachusetts Playbook and co-host of the Horse Race podcast, as well as Laura Krantz. She covers national politics and 2020 for the Boston Globe. All right, let's dig in, ladies. Are we glad that it's February 11th? Yes? Yeah, I got one yes and one no.
I'm sad it's over.
You're sad it's over. It's not over quite yet. So let's start with this notion of undeclared voters. Laura, I know you wrote about this recently. More than 42% of New Hampshire voters are registered as undeclared. We know that a lot of those voters, though, just want a candidate who can beat President Trump. So is that something that is going to unite those voters?
I think so, yes. And even though there's a lot of folks who are registered as independent here, many of them consistently vote Democrat. So you're going to have those people who are also in the category of people like the rest of the people who are registered Democrats, just trying to figure out who can beat Trump. And I do think you might have some people who traditionally vote Republican who are interested in possibly voting for one of the more moderate Democrats.
So speaking of President Trump, he held a Keep America Great Again rally here in Manchester last night, Stephanie, and I happened to run into some people who were exiting the arena. They were so energized coming out of that. I wonder, overall, how was the president received here?
I mean, among Democrats, Democrats really want him out of office, but among Republicans, he's super, super popular. He has a few primary challengers, one of them being Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who's from a neighboring state just south of here. But it seems like nobody's going to be able to kind of break through President Trump's firewall. The line was just around the arena. People were lining up the afternoon before the rally.
And you were talking to some of those folks on the line. What were the things that they were telling you?
I mean, they were proud to be there to see him. They had all of their Keep America Great gear on. And it's really interesting because just kind of a half hour up the street, Bernie Sanders was holding a similar size rally. He had around 7,500 people at UNH for a concert with the Strokes and Alexander Ocasio-Cortez.
It's a pretty big crowd size, yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really large.
So, Laura, let me ask you, what is it that voters are actually focused on at this point? You know, we're past impeachment, we're past State of the Union. What is it that voters right now have their minds most clearly set on?
They're desperate to figure out who can beat Donald Trump, and that's all they care about. You ask them, you know, what are the top issues? How do you pick a candidate? And they say, well, healthcare, climate change, but mostly who can beat Trump.
So that is really the overarching theme that you've been hearing.
Yeah.
And how long has that been the case? I mean, is that pretty much consistently?
I think it's always been the case.
Really?
But it seems that in these final few days here, especially because of what happened in Iowa, people feel such pressure to pick someone because they feel like this is going to be really the first signal. Yeah.
So let me ask you, Stephanie, voters in New Hampshire are known for making their decisions late. So are we seeing any kind of last-ditch efforts by some candidates in these final hours?
I think the candidate to watch here in New Hampshire who maybe hadn't gotten as much attention until the final week is Amy Klobuchar. She had been kind of under the radar. She was having these consistent, really positive debate performances. She was being talked about in the media, but she wasn't getting very large crowds here or anything like that. But after Iowa, when she kind of finished higher than she expected to, than people expected her to, she rode that momentum here in New Hampshire, and she's been getting crowds of like 700 people for her. There was a lot of momentum. So if she is able to kind of perform well in the top 3 or 4 tonight, I think that will be a big deal.
Yeah.
There's 2 things about her that I think are interesting. One, is she going to split the moderate vote, right? Like you also have Pete Buttigieg, who's been rising in the polls since Iowa, since Biden didn't perform too well. But then you have the Sanders people who are just totally loyal. And so will Amy pull from the Pete people and essentially allow Sanders to get a plurality? The other thing, too, is will Amy come in above Elizabeth Warren, which I think could be pretty disastrous for Warren's campaign.
Yeah,
so.
I want to talk more. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
On that line of moderate voters, I mean, we've seen Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden go after each other this week, too, with attack ads and kind of speeches where they were needling each other. And what sources have been telling me is that it's great for Amy Klobuchar because she's kind of the moderate who's rising above and not getting nicked by any of those attacks.
Interesting. Let me ask you about Joe Biden, Laura, because he is skipping his final event here in New Hampshire and going on to South Carolina. What does that say about the state of his campaign?
It's really fascinating. I think he has, at this point, realized that South Carolina might be his last hope. and is heading to where he feels like he can do the best, kind of almost writing off New Hampshire.
I know. Have we really seen that before? Not on primary night, no, not
No,
necessarily.
yeah.
So certainly fascinating to see that play out. But going back to Senator Elizabeth Warren, Stephanie, a lot of eyes were on her campaign, but she is also trailing according to our latest polling. So what are you actually watching for from her tonight?
Well, I'm watching to see if she can kind of turn things around and drum up that momentum that she had in the spring and summer. I think she was the candidate who got lost in the shuffle in the news coverage and the conversation after Iowa. We were surprised that Amy Klobuchar did so well. We were surprised Joe Biden didn't do so well. And the big story coming out of Iowa was either Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg declaring victory. And so where does that leave Elizabeth Warren? She really needs to do well tonight because we're in a neighboring state. Massachusetts is only 45 minutes down the highway from here. So this is a big test of her campaign.
One thing, one candidate I didn't mention was Deval Patrick. And I know, Stephanie, you've covered a little bit of this in Playbook. So just tell us a little bit about how it is that he is viewed and some of the efforts that he's been really trying to make here in New Hampshire.
So he got into the race a lot later than the other candidates. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, a number of candidates had already been running for almost a year when he got into the race in November, and he's faced a really steep climb. He polls at around 1% to 2%. He is going to kind of the smaller house party events that candidates were doing last year, but he's gotten some support in the last few days. He brought a big crowd, 800 volunteers to a dinner in New Hampshire, kind of the big last blockbuster Democratic primary event, and he's out there working the polls today. So I mean, not sure how he'll do, but it's interesting to see if you can get in and get any traction this late.
Finally, for both of you, what's the one thing that you're keeping your eye on tonight? Laura, I'll start with you.
I think Amy Klobuchar.
Amy Klobuchar. What about you, Stephanie?
Bernie Sanders. I want to see if he can do what he did in 2016, really shocking people and winning a really large portion of the vote. I'm wondering if he can do that again this time around.
A lot of storylines to watch. Laura, Stephanie, thank you both very much. Rena, we are all set here at the Bonfire Country Bar. We will be tracking things all day and all night. For now, though, I'll send it back to you in New York.
Elaine, thank you very much. And we will check back with you and the team a little bit later on. So stick with us, folks.